Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our second session. If you're just joining us now, welcome to the conference. We want you to know that all sessions are being recorded and you can watch them back at the website. This session we'll be talking about implementation strategies. If you have any technical or general questions, you may write them in the chat privately or to everyone. We will be having a Q&A session at the end. So we'll ask you really write your questions so you have for our speakers. Our first speaker, Guy Levy, who's the Chief of Innovation Officer at Center for Educational Technology in Israel, will begin. So Guy, you can start. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's share it. So hello everyone again. I want to share with you, I think, an interesting voyage or road that we gone through in the last few months. And microcredential was an essential part of it, but I should start with, I think, the story of what we were doing. I assume some of you are aware of Education 2030 framework of the OECD. So we at CAT are a partner on the development of the framework. And last October in Paris, in the meeting of the OECD, where the framework was actually certified, I had the privilege to open phase 2 in presenting what I call the model of implementation strategy, which the concept, the model, and the idea of microcredential was essential. Just a second before, this is the Center for Education and Technology, just to give you some few details. We were born in 1971 on the agenda of promoting the education system in Israel. And as I said in the beginning, we are collaborating with the Ministry of Education. Being an autonomous organization enabled us to really go with innovation constantly, and I will talk about it now. So this is the model of Education 2030, the framework, the OECD learning framework for 2030, which of course should start now. And it is developed or based on knowledge, skills, attitude, and value based on 36 constructs that were defined through the process of development of the framework. And the idea of the framework that it is based on development of skills through competencies. And this is essential because current curricula in most Western countries or in most OECD countries are actually based on content knowledge and summative assessment. And this does not go in line with the new framework. Phase 2 is concentrating on what kind of curriculum we should develop that will enable us to work in this framework, that will enable us to develop skills through attitude and value through competencies. What kind of curriculum, what kind of teacher's profile we need to look at and develop, what kind of learning strategies we need to develop, what kind of teaching strategies we want to or we need to develop that we will be able to really promote and implement the new framework. So I will tell you a story about an endeavor that we went through in the Center for Educational Technology, and it has to do with a science curriculum for middle school. It involved innovating pedagogy, you'll soon see it, STEAM curriculum, middle school, as I said, an idea of data-driven evaluation, and however, we started with competency-based. Why did we start with competency-based professional development? Because through the development of the curriculum, which was done with teachers and students in schools, we realized that teachers are, in a way, are not really capable of running this new and innovative pedagogy, which is based on constructivist learning with augmented reality. You'll soon see it, which is based on makers. It's no longer sage on the stage. It's not even guide on the side only. It's leading different type of learning processes, different type of learning organization, class organization, teamwork, etc. The solution was to develop a micro-credential course that will go align with the implementation of the new curriculum, and of course with the assistance of the Ministry of Education. These teachers that are going through that are getting the full credential for the working. So this is an even, I would say, more innovative model, because the new curriculum, and you can look at it as a new learning product, part of it is the professional development. And so the idea for Learn is we introduce them to the kit of sensors, electrical sensors that we provide. Again, the video. And then they plan, as you already see when Shir presented the model. They documented it, they reflect and peer assess. But this goes along with the implementation process in the class. So let's look a bit about the innovative pedagogy and reflect about the competency-based PD that went along with that. So the idea was going into Maker's team, using augmented reality for teaching electrical circuits. We've developed in one of CET innovative unit an application that goes on the mobile called CourseLine that enable, as you see here on the screen, for the teachers to send pedagogical and learning posts to the students. They can respond to that, and the entire application enable collaborative learning, go directly to the projector, and help the teacher to run a collaborative session. Now, the idea of learning physical and digital integration, this is something really essential, and I will elaborate on that in a few minutes as I go along with the presentation. And the idea was learning by doing and collaboration. The subject that we selected is energy in electrical systems. This is for middle school, and this is part of the national curriculum. And the idea here is to take all the national curriculum in STEM or in STEAM for middle school and make at least 30–40% of it engaging, experimental, teamwork, and involving advanced technology, makers, etc. So let's see how it works. We've developed an augmented reality application. You'll soon see how it works. And we got this universal cards that the students develop and explore their understanding of electrical circuits by experimentation with the augmented reality application. And this is something that everybody understands about constructivist learning, which is very important. So they explore it themselves. It's no longer the teacher go to the blackboard or to the whiteboard and drawing it and looking at the class that's in front of her or him. So this was very important. Now you can see more sophisticated electrical circuits. So We have an ability to provide them with, and in terms of skills, this is first problem-solving skills. This is something that we can then we can record, and we'll see it shortly. And also creativity, because if we ask them as an assignment to provide different types of solutions to a problem, or to build different types of electrical circuits, we can also look at the level of creativity. So you can see here, it's a real photograph from a school. And now, when we look at data-driven evaluation, look at that. So basically what we have here is, you can see how we work with the application. And on the left side of the screen, you can see how we collect the data. Now, in few seconds, as you see now, the solution is correct, so it becomes green. But in a few seconds, the dashboard on the left bottom part of the screen will be enlarged, and we can see what exactly is the data that we are collecting. It's important to say that this is the very initial stage of data collection of problem-solving, digital, actually data collection of problem-solving. And we hope that within 1 or 2 years, we'll be able to demonstrate competencies and skills, 21st century skills, via digital data collection. It's pretty a big endeavor, but we are going through that. But don't forget the makers, because this is not enough. And we need the students to experiment it themselves. Now, pedagogically wise, it's not that they explore with the augmented reality and understood the electrical circuits law. They did it in parallel. When they started with the electrical circuits, immediately they started to build with the kit we provide them and with disposable materials they brought from home, the games. And as they evolved in the curriculum in more sophisticated and more elaborated electrical circuits, they also improved and made the games more elaborated. And it improved itself, something very, it was really successful in terms of the combination of the augmented reality and the makers. So it was engaging, it was group work, it was creative, it was in this term, and the combination proved very successful. So we can see here another example of games and the way the students are working. And this is like a soccer. When you hit the goal, the light comes up. And of course, the entire process of maker, and you all know that, is something that comes along with many failures, and then you try again and you do. And this is the learning process that we want these 21st century kids, this Z generation, to go through. So let me sum it up now and go back to the competency-based PD. What we found out to begin with is that, as I said, that the teacher has some problems, dealing with how they really lead a learning process like this. So starting with competency-based professional development with micro-credentials, along with that, we also combined with that e-meetings, virtual e-meeting with the teachers along the process of the teaching and learning this content, and they shared problems, they shared successes, so this was we actually built a community, a professional community of practice. Just to give you another clue, we also opened a WhatsApp group among the teachers, and they also shared that. And this really helped pedagogically wise. It helped the teacher in terms of their confidence in what they're doing. They constantly share knowledge, share experience, and actually what we've seen here is a new process of implementing national curriculum, which is innovative, pedagogy-based, makers, creativity, etc. And it's really, in terms of, we are now at the end of the pilot with about 20 schools and more than 600 students. And we will come up with the results and with the conclusion, but we can say that from what is going on right now, that it is very successful. It would not have been that successful without developing the competency-based professional development. And this is something that we think we should start to develop more innovative ideas how to integrate micro-credential into a new curriculum, into the real learning process, and not only take, this competency-based of what we have currently with the national curriculum. So basically, I think the idea was here to demonstrate how micro-credential can support the implementation process of innovative pedagogy. So I'm done. Thank you.
You can right-click and you're controlling my screen. Just unmute yourself. We can't hear you. Just a second. We can hear you now, Linda, and you can start. I'll go back to the beginning.
Okay, great. All right, and can you see the video or no? Just want to check. You can. All right, I'll just get started then. So welcome. My name is Lynette Westafaro, and I'm the executive, the CEO of Teaching Matters. Teaching Matters is a nonprofit professional learning organization that partners nationally, and we have a strong focus here in New York City. What I wanted to do today was kind of cover over three things. One, just to speak to how micro-credentials can be applied to the challenge of career pathways and developing teachers in large systems. I want to take you through a very specific case example of how we partnered with the New York City school system to use micro-credentials to solve a particular system-wide challenge that they were facing. And then just to give you some results of the program itself, give you a sense of what the program was able to demonstrate. So start off with welcome to New York. And what you see before you, sometimes I like to start with the end, is these are, every dot on here is a school that is served by the New York City school system. Every one of those schools now has what we call a teacher leader. Teacher leader is a kind of new career pathway model in New York where teachers are being developed to lead other teachers, to promote collaborative learning, to coach teachers, to lead inquiry teams. And it's a new kind of model for retention, hopefully to keep teachers staying in the city. And so this will be about sort of how did we get to this end place where we have all these schools with these positions, and what role did micro-credentials play in that? You know what, it's not, still, hold on a second. Maybe I should just share mine. Can you hear me? All right, hold on. I'm going to share my screen because I think that would be easier. Okay, hold on. Evan, do you, hold on. I'm sorry, I can't.
It's the share at the bottom and then share your whole screen, the first one on the left.
Yeah, that's what I thought, but here we go. Okay. All right, tell me if you see it now. Is that good?
Yes, great.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. Apologies. All right, so again, this is the ecosystem in which we're working with in New York, and big picture over the last 5 years, we partnered with the Office of Teacher Recruitment, and they have staffed 1,282 teacher leaders. And so the challenge that New York is really facing here is trying to do talent work at kind of an enormous scale. New York City is a school district that serves 1,800 schools, 78,000 teachers, 1.1 million students. And so it's more equivalent to a country or a very large state, and it's the largest school system in New York. And so New York was trying to solve a very specific challenge that in developing this role, this new role of teacher leadership, they had created new funding, new positions, and they opened up this job. And what they found was that the kids in the highest need schools were the least likely to get these teachers. And this matters because in New York, we know that our highest need students are disproportionately in schools which are impacted by higher teacher turnover rates. And the whole goal of this model of teacher leadership was to promote retention and collaboration. And yet when we opened up the roles, or when New York opened up the roles, we had most of our teachers coming from the schools that probably least needed these roles, or the role needed them, but it was not what the program was designed to support. And so move on. The challenge really was, how do we target this population of high need schools where we were producing significantly fewer applicants for the teacher leader role, and we weren't getting enough teachers that were applying, and develop this pipeline. And so they started to rethink the way in which they thought about micro-credentials, not only to develop teachers, but also to encourage, to develop, to select, and to really staff these roles. So how does competency-based micro-credentialing solve this challenge of building a pipeline? The focus really was, how do we at scale, at this enormous scale, develop and find the right teachers for the right roles? How do we build a bench? How do we develop teachers that are missing these skills? How do we ensure that at this scale, especially working in the high need environments where they were in, where they really couldn't be on the ground and see the teachers, that they could ensure that they were being selective enough? Other than, say, having the principal select the teachers, how at the system level could we ensure that we're selecting the right people for the right roles? And also, how could we ensure that the professional learning was not just about showing people, but really, really ensuring that the folks in the roles could actually demonstrate those bridge skills? And then the fact is that they needed to do it fairly quickly for large numbers of folks. So we partnered with them and designed a micro-credentialing program that was focused on kind of 4 key skills, and or competencies. And I just want to speak to these because when you're designing programs at scale and cost is a factor, the challenge can be really honing in on what the most important kind of key competencies are. So the way that they designed it was, we laid out a whole series of things that we knew teacher leaders' competencies they would need. And then we made some hard choices about which ones they would have to demonstrate before moving into the role. So it was a model where there will ultimately be lots of choice, in competencies that people can learn, but in deciding which competencies will be the important ones to move into the role, how do we select those? How do we decide what's important? And that was a kind of a really good process where we engaged with the union, with the central office, and with our own experience in practitioner work. I think there was a question before of how do you include the teachers in designing these? We really figured out where was it that when people moved into the roles did they really struggle? Not every single thing they needed to know, but what were some prerequisite progression skills that often teachers had not demonstrated in their own classrooms before they moved into these roles. And so we had to make some really hard choices. And these are just some of the examples of some of the things that we chose. And to just be really specific, one of the roles of teacher leaders is leading data inquiry, using data-driven instruction, data-driven work to drive collaboration and learning. And what we found is so many of our teachers that had been in the higher needs schools had not been systematically doing that in their own work. And so in order to move into the roles, one of the skills became, or the competencies became, in your own classroom, really collecting assessment information, identifying a teaching practice you had to change, engaging in that practice, then reassessing the kids, and having made very data-driven decisions in your own classroom before you would move into this role. And the process would be to submit artifacts, the data that you used, how you changed your practice, and get coached through that process. So that was really critical. But I think the main point I wanted to say is that when you're dealing with competencies and you're really going down into the specific skills, there becomes this issue of choice. And so again, the decision on choice was really looking at what we call bridge or gap skills, going from one role to another, and again, making those hard choices. So, and just in terms of then how was the model structured across the city, where we're developing, thousands of teachers, the role itself, we identified, again, the whole series of competencies that were aligned to the goals. The role was developed with really clear competencies, which was somewhat new for the city to be so definitive in that way. Then on those competencies, which I just showed you, we had a series of practice-based coaching. So the teacher would learn the skill, just like we saw in the other example, learn the skill, apply the skill, collect evidence of mastery, and then be coached online with feedback on how to implement or revise that skill so that they could actually be recognized with a micro-credential. And this is just, again, in terms of the process, we had a series of, in this particular case, we had workshops that they could attend. This is now morphed into online content that people can learn. They don't actually need to go face-to-face in some of the newer work. And just to be clear, the city was initially unable to move away from the face-to-face workshops. They still had the application to the classroom, but they couldn't move away from that workshop. But over time now, we've been able to move away and present that content online in other areas. They then were able to access all these resources online. They applied what they learned back at the school, they received coaching, and then they submitted the micro-credentials. So I just repeating that process, but I want to be clear that when systems are moving into these new models, we did this without jumping straight away into something which was totally virtual, submit. We started with the old, but we migrated to the new. And so we did talk to teachers about, and to the system about, what is the value of moving into a competency-based model where it's not about what you learn, it's about what you can actually do and demonstrate in your school, which is really, really important. And what we heard from the teachers themselves was that they all roundly felt that this was a better way for educators to learn, that they really appreciated the fact that the energy and emphasis was on application to the classroom and was not just seat time, that there was also, because this was aligned to pathways for advancement, they saw a lot of value, and we had very high completion rates. 75% of teachers that participated in this actually completed the model, because there were big incentives with regards to the rewards at the end, which can be sometimes a challenge with the work. That through the micro-credentials, there became a clear understanding of what good looked like, because of the specificity, and the definition of the competency, and the really honing in on what, and allowing people to practice at this micro level and get really, really good at that. People felt that was really strong. People also felt that they had ownership over their own learning. So even though we had 4 micro-credentials that were necessary to pass in order to get into the role, and there are, again, optional ones, but 4 required, this gave people a sense of ownership, partially because of the process, because what you did with that micro-credential was something you could apply into your own classroom. It was very job embedded, and teachers found that to be extraordinarily valuable. And then there's just the portable digital history of their learning. So when you are promoting a new role and you're moving people in our system, younger teachers who were moving into these roles had a way of demonstrating. It was not just that I was favored by the teacher, by the principal, because, you know, it moved away from politics. It was not just like test score assessments, but they have a portable digital history of their learning. They can point to the competencies that they've mastered, and that is why they have the role. So it gave some credibility to the position. The system itself responded that what they found, and over time, and just to be clear, this was a work in progress. Initially, the system was doing a lot of sit and get training and old-fashioned selection, and this was a pilot. And over time, they have really, really swung in this direction and want to go further in the future, because what they found was that these competencies started to allow them to really put out what their priorities were in the role. They could study the data of what teachers were struggling with, and then put out those competencies aligned really specifically to where they knew struggle was. It ultimately is a lower cost model when you're doing something at this kind of scale. They also felt in a system the size of New York, you easily and almost immediately often lose track of what teachers have what skills. And so this allowed them to codify the knowledge. For the first time ever, they knew which teachers in the system had demonstrated specific skills. And that's an area that they want to grow as they want to kind of build out different kinds of specialties. They were able to monitor and support large numbers of teachers at scale, and the micro-credentials themselves gave them a way to kind of really measure impact. These are performance tasks of teacher skill, and unlike other movements which have been in the United States, we have done a lot of, do kids pass tests? Good teachers, are the ones whose kids pass the most tests. There's a lot of resistance, understandably, to some of that. This gave a way to measure impact that was palatable to unions, palatable to the teachers, and really the assessment process felt like it was really supporting the learning and didn't feel punitive in the way that other models have felt. And I'll speak to that, in that we had the teachers that did not make it through or pass also, when surveyed, said that the experience of going through the program they found to be really beneficial. So even though they were not selected because they could not demonstrate those competencies, they felt that the process honored and respected them, and they felt like it was valuable learning. So let me just briefly speak to impact. One of the big challenges to scale was ensuring that we could provide and support schools across the Bronx to have these roles. And what the studies had shown was that one teacher leader in a school does not have an impact. What matters is having a critical mass of teacher leaders. And so that's 2 to 3. And so you can imagine this made the scale problem even more significant. And because of this more efficient, effective way of developing people and selecting them to the roles, we had about 136% increase in the number of schools that suddenly demonstrated critical mass of teacher teams. The research on teacher teams demonstrated that with those teacher teams in place, those schools that had effective teacher teams saw increased retention. We have a way of assessing our schools in New York where we look at school-wide collaboration, and we found a measurable impact on the collaboration levels in those buildings. And we found a measurable impact with respect to improved teacher practice. So, the schools that had been rated developing in this particular area, we have this indicator 1.2 where people observe the teachers in the classroom. we had a measurable number of schools move in this direction. And of course, this is a program that was done at scale over the course of 4 years, and these were some of the end results. And just to clarify, the micro-credentialing was not the only support, obviously, that was given. This was the pathway model to get into the role. And so I don't want to take full credit for all of these. The micro-credentialing cannot take credit for all these outcomes, but it was tied into this idea of making sure that the teachers we put into those roles, that we had this very selective process, but very targeted process to make sure we had the right people in those roles. So just to wrap up in terms of what's next, the city has really embraced this as a very effective mechanism for providing such targeted support, and is now thinking about expanding the way that they do this, and they want to get more into more content-specific micro-credentials. There's the potential to use this to support specialized roles. For example, mathematics, ELA, English language learners is a real challenge in New York, and there's a whole set of skills related to that, and they see this as having quite a bit of potential. And there's more possibilities to do this because the system is now starting to has been given the right to do some accrediting in New York. And so they're really looking towards this as a kind of a future model. So with that, I'm going to stop there. I wanted to ask you very quickly if anybody has thought about this with respect to large systems. Are there any large system problems you might be trying to solve? And then anything else you might like to know about the model?
Thank you so much. We're going to let people kind of write their questions in the chat, but thank you. So if you have any questions for Guy, please let us know now. Thank you. Okay, so first question is, how does the coaching scale easily? Is that peer coaching as well?
So the coaching was online coaching. Once we had very focused competencies, we were able to, so Teaching Matters is an organization that does coaching and peer feedback on-site in schools. That's, we have a number of consultants. We're working 100 schools across New York. That's our scale. We have quite a bit of scale. However, you can see when you're working with 1 or 2 positions across a large system, you can't scale in that way. And so this allowed that coaching. So we had a cohort of coaches that were able to work. They were working on evenings and weekends, and were able to coach those teachers in, these were sessions of half an hour online where there was feedback, there was review of the artifacts, and there was a conversation and a dialogue and feedback, much like they do when they're in the school. What we found was that because it was online and because it was so focused, it was more efficient, and therefore the same coaching resources were able to go much, much further than they had in the past.
How might an organization partner with the district to build out a micro-credentials program? We get a lot of requests to help define it for a district. So curious about your recommendations on starting from the beginning with the district.
So the question of how you might partner with the district. Well, so I mean, some of this particular work happened because we had a relationship with New York City schools, and we were doing this work at the school level already. So how do you get a relationship with a district is one question. And I probably won't speak to that, but how do you partner with a district to help them begin to think about this as like the next phase? To be honest with you, I think the number one thing is to really listen at a system problem that they're trying to solve. Really hear them, and then think about how the micro-credentials can actually solve a systematic problem at scale. Because micro-credentials themselves are not always the thing that districts are worried about or thinking about. You have to approach them from where they are. And what we have found is that there are a lot of problems at scale that micro-credentials are really a good solution to. And so I would say you listen to them, you identify a systemic problem, and then you have to come up with an efficient approach like we did. Again, we didn't develop these teachers on every possible thing. We came up with those key things that when they move into the role, we saw the most problems with. And that was very compelling, and that encouraged them to want to spend resources. Now, to be fair, I want you to give a backdrop on this. New York City had a federal grant to do this work. And so they did have some resources to experiment and innovate. And that was also part of the way we were able to do it.
I want to refer sorry for putting in, but to the previous question about the coaching. And what we found out, well, it's not scientific. It's not something that we know we're doing for a long time. But for example, the WhatsApp group that becomes part of 20 teachers and of course our team who are actually the coacher. But what happened is the teacher become like a co-coachers of one another, because they share knowledge, they share experience, they learn from one another, and then the interaction and the collaboration and the learning among the teacher, we found it really, really impressive work. So it may be an interesting thing to look at as something that looks like a coaching process.
Thank you. So our last question is, what evidence does the teacher show to gain credit?
So depending on the competency, and I'm sorry, I just realized that you haven't been able to see me at any point in this.
No,
so
we can see you.
You can see me, okay? All right. So my colleague is on. He said wasn't able to during the presentation. So depending on the microcredential, there was a series of evidence. Teachers were so for example, the evidence was different depending on the microcredential. The evidence was aligned to what would show mastery. So just like if you were to create a competency performance task for children, that's exactly what we did for the adults. That is an art and a science, I think, because you can come up with a performance task that suits your needs. The trick of this and the art of this is coming up with a performance task that really suits the teacher's needs, so that it is flexible enough and valuable enough that doing that task is going to advance their work. And I think that honestly is the trick of it, that we don't create we don't want to replicate classroom experiences where people are doing, projects for the teacher, but they are really creating performance tasks which are things which advance their work. And when you're doing it from a central position of the office, of central office, and you're not coaching one-on-one in a school, that can be more challenging. And in New York, every single school has, we have different curriculum. I loved seeing in the last example, aligning this work to a national curriculum. I think that creates many, many opportunities to have the evidence be directly tied to the daily work of that teacher or the daily work of that school. We have a more challenging set of constraints in New York in that the curricula is not uniform. And so we really have to focus on key pedagogical practices, but you have to do this in a way that really furthers the teacher's work. When you further the work for the teacher and you're really mindful of what they value and what they have to do, and you really build that in, and you give them tools that they're not just going to use for the task at hand, but are going to use next year in their career. And let me give you just an example. We're very proud of this. So we've had teachers email and said that on the data inquiry cycle, the tools that we gave them to use, they're still using in their instruction. Like and that's, I think, how you build teacher buy-in to this, is that you don't create busy work for them or work that takes them so far out of their work. It's not only job embedded, but it really, really furthers their work in a way that they'll continue to do it. And so some of the best ways to build micro-credentials is from, if you have models where you're coaching teachers already and you're really working side by side with teachers, what really resonates with them. So bringing theory to practice, heavy on the practice, the things that they value most as the ways to demonstrate the work.
Well, I think that we are in a beginning of development of a new model, and And Zvika, I think that what we should do, we should constantly look at the evidence that we get, evaluate them, analyze them, and even provide the teachers the ability to create their own, because I think we can learn a great deal from that. I think that they can really share it with another. It's not an open, it's not like an open system, but maybe it is like, and I think we should really be as agile as we can, as flexible as we can, and learn from the teachers, because I think we can learn a great deal from their experience and from what they can show us. And we're really looking forward to the next phases of micro-credentials in Israel, and how can we constantly improve and get this model more innovative.
Thank you very much, Guy, on that. It was great. So what's going to happen now, we have 2 parallel lectures. So this virtual room will actually close, and we're going to ask you to connect via the website to the next 2 sessions. The first session, C1, is about technology, tools, and platform, and the second session is about research supporting micro-credentials. So really connect via the website. We're looking forward to seeing you in the next sessions. Our last session is a panel, so we'd love for you to join us. I'll put the link to the website again in the chat. So this room will be closing.